There goes. So that's recording and
Hey, Ange, it's going to be, I'm going to share it off the show page. So if you want to share it out, you can find it right on there.
Okay. I'm just doing it on my phone right now, so I don't know if I have time to do it.
I gotcha.
This is Don West here, and I'm telling you, Knockouts and 3 Counts is the podcast, baby. Make sure that's the one you check out, because, buddy, like me, they're the real deal, baby.
all right, you got about 20.
Let you know.
Okay.
You listen to Knockouts and 3 Counts, or you see that damn snake again.
Got about 10.
This is the Ring of Honor World Television
And there's your
Champion,
5 count.
AKA Shane T, boy, the baddest champion you ever seen, boy. And you're listening to Knockouts and 3 Counts.
What up, though, everybody? This is Kyle, and you are listening to Knockouts and 3 Counts. And as you can tell if you saw our teaser video on our YouTube or anywhere else, which, before I get anywhere, stop and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and make sure you don't miss any of our great content. We're going to have a great show with you tonight. Not quite the show that we had planned, but we're still going to get into a lot of that stuff. So, without any further ado, we've got Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, Angelo Popovsky. How you doing, brother, man?
Great. What's happening, Kyle? Thanks for having me.
Not much, man. Just living this quarantine life. So, with you being a teacher, for those of our listeners who don't know who you are, you're a teacher as well. So, what's that been like for you during your quarantine?
Well, I'm sure you guys have heard. We pretty much have completely switched up what we're doing, and we've gone to like completely online teaching pretty much overnight. We had to kind of change gears, so that's been a learning process, and it's kind of just is what it is. We gotta do it, and we're just gonna finish up the year here and do everything online. So it's been pretty crazy.
So, obviously, high school teaching isn't the only teaching you do, and that leads to how you and I know each other. First of all, before we get to your teaching, tell us a little bit about your lineage, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because for those of you who don't know, spoiler alert, that's how we know each other. So tell everybody a little bit about that, and tell them a little bit about how long you've been doing Jiu-Jitsu.
So I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think it was 1997. It was about this time, actually, like the spring of 97, I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. At that time, the UFCs were popular and everything, and I had kind of watched the first couple UFCs, and that's when Royce Gracie and the Gracie family kind of blew up on the scene with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I had just graduated college and was looking for something competitive to do, and my brother had always been in martial arts, and he was, a fan of the UFCs, and he kind of got me into it. And there was a gym that was teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, near us, and he told me to go check it out, and I did. And sure enough, the big thing was I wanted to go see if they were legit, and sure enough, they were. And that was kind of pretty much it. That was like the start of my jiu-jitsu career. At that time, there really wasn't a lot of places to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there wasn't really a lot of other teams around. The Gracies were pretty much it. So that's kind of where my journey started, was under the Gracies, the Gracie family, primarily Royce Gracie at that time. And during my time training with the Gracies, I would go out to California and train at the Gracie Academy periodically. Kaiki was one of the main instructors there, Master Kaiki, who we're under now. And, I got to know him and train closely with him. And a few years later, Kaiki decided to kind of split off and do his own thing and start his own team. So a bunch of the affiliates that were under the Gracies kind of had to make a decision. Do they stay with the Gracies or do they go with Kaiki? And myself and Harvey, who owns Warrior Way, we kind of sat down and had a discussion. We thought it was in our best interest to go with Kaiki. So we made that change a few years after that. I can't remember the exact year that happened now, but ever since then we've been with Kaiki. So my lineage, or our lineage in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is still in line with the Gracies. Kaiki still says and teaches Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so that's still who our lineage is under. So that's kind of what takes me to today.
I'm glad to hear that you answered that question, because in all the years I've known you, I never knew why Kaiki split off to do his own thing.
Right.
And that's sad, considering I've known you for what? I met you in what, 2008?
I don't know. I was trying to think how long it's been.
When did MASH open? 2008, right? Something like that.
It's got to be something like that. Yeah, I know they just had their anniversary, but
yeah, that's where when I first met you, because when I first came in, you had Justin James was still there, Miles was there, Don was still fighting, Damon Dyer, Brandon Hunt.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of which, Justin James, I'll give you another ass whooping in Warzone anytime you want. I just played in a tournament against him and all his buddies from Extreme Couture. We wiped out the first two teams, and then we lost in the finals 4 games to 2.
Nice.
It was a good time. But yeah, man, that's when I first met you guys, and that kind of leads me into a little bit of the topic I wanted to get into with jiu-jitsu. In that, when I met you, I was probably about 15 years old, something like that, 15, 16, around there.
Yeah.
It must have been 15, because it was before I was driving.
Okay.
And so when I met you guys, like I had a little bit of issues. For those of our listeners who don't know, I have cerebral palsy along with Crohn's disease. So I'm not always the most flexible person. So for my jiu-jitsu game, I had to learn how to, make jiu-jitsu applicable for me. So for me, that meant my upper body was really strong. So I like arm triangles. I like guillotines. I like rear naked chokes. I like kimuras. I like anything that I can use my arms to do. And for you, you're a high school teacher along with being a jiu-jitsu teacher. What for you made jiu-jitsu the choice for you in as far as martial arts goes? Because I feel like for me personally, with my own health issues, jiu-jitsu to me is the most applicable self-defense strategy.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like for me, it started off with just being something competitive to do. I played football, little league, all the way through college. And when I graduated college, like I instantly had nothing to do, like competitive wise, and I remember I graduated college and I had this idea that I was going to try to find an arena football team to try out for. Like I was just trying to find something to do to be competitive. And I was working out and I was trying to get bigger. I was bigger than I am now, but I still wasn't, like football big enough, I thought. So I was trying to get bigger. And it was about that time that I took my first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class, and I just fell in love with it. I never looked back. And like at that time, I'm nowhere near that weight now, but like I instantly just dropped, like, I don't even know what it was, like 60 pounds in the first like summer, couple months of doing jiu-jitsu. Like I was just training all the time, and jiu-jitsu became my thing. I just kind of fell in love with it. Like I said, for me, it was just the competition of it, and, realizing that it was pretty much like the ultimate self-defense, like you said.
So can you speak a little bit? So here's the thing with UFC getting as big as it has at this point, and I shouldn't say UFC, MMA has gotten as big as it has. I feel like a lot of people in 2020 think it's just as simple as you go into a gym, you train for 3 years, and you get a black belt.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about, your journey to black belt and some of the
the trials and tribulations that somebody may not know along the way, because I feel like people just think it's like karate in that you can, you can get a black belt. I don't want to say easy because they put in work
Right.
to do it, but
Right.
it's not, in my personal opinion, it's not the same. It's not, I don't know. It's just not the same. I don't know how to word it in the proper way, but it's just not the same to me.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, if you've had any exposure to martial arts, you know that it's not uncommon to see a 12-year-old black belt, or like you said, somebody trains and 2 years, 3 years down the road, they're a black belt. And, if you know anything about martial arts, there's usually like, I don't know, at least 12 belts along the way to black belt. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what is there? 5: white belt, blue belt, purple, brown, and then black.
Right.
So it's, we tell people, if you're coming into Jiu-Jitsu for the belts or to get a quick promotion, it's not the style for you. It's definitely not the style for you. Jiu-Jitsu is not about necessarily the belts. And, I started at a time when the promotions in Jiu-Jitsu weren't as, I don't want to say structured, but there wasn't really like a system for promotions. You kind of just trained, and you never knew when you were going to get a promotion. We didn't really do a lot of stripes, especially like with white belts. You just were training, and then one day you would get your next belt. So trials and tribulations, one of the things was just the frustration of never knowing when you were going to get promoted. It was just it seemed random. Nowadays we have a little bit more expectations for students. We keep track of classes, and there's a class count that gets involved with it. Not that it's like the definitive thing in promoting someone, but students kind of know a little bit more now what to expect and what they need to do for their next belt. Comparing it to being a teacher, the old days, it would be like me giving a test to my students, but not telling them when the test would be or what material was on the test, and now at least you can't do that, right? So, you have to tell the student what they need to know, what the expectation is, and then they do their part of their job of showing up and putting the time in, and then that's kind of how the system should go.
So here's the other funny thing with jiu-jitsu. So for me, jiu-jitsu has led me to what you guys are watching right now. I was a lifelong pro wrestling fan, which we've already talked about in great detail on this show. But, for me, I started boxing at 14 years old and had fought a couple times before I came to MASH where I met you guys at. And so for me, once I came in there, like I said, at the time I came in there, past guest of the show, Miles Jury was in there. You got Justin James, who's at Extreme Couture, who was in there. You had Darren Kirkshank in there. Angelo was still, doing his thing in King of the Cage. John was fighting everywhere. I mean, we literally had guys everywhere. And so I was training with a lot of the best guys around here. I remember Ken Shamrock coming through there when I was there. And good Lord, all kinds of guys, James Lee that everybody in Michigan knows, was there when I was there. And so for me, it was a lot of guys out there, but through jiu-jitsu, when I would go and travel, I went and traveled out at American Top Team, out in Florida. I went and trained there and got to train a little bit. I've gotten to do different seminars and things with Don. You have gotten to train with quite the different array of people. So originally, if any of you guys were wondering why there may have been some teasers to 5-Finger Death Punch stuff in that promo video you saw, that's because we were going to have Zoltan Bathory from 5-Finger Death Punch with us, but scheduling stuff got in the way with that. So no big deal there. But you've gotten to train with them. And first of all, since we're in quarantine, what kind of music have you been listening to lately?
My gosh, dude. I really, honestly, it's been, talk about going crazy during quarantine. I have a 3-year-old son, so I'm spending a lot of time with him. And it's like, I don't really get a lot of time to just kind of chill and do my own thing. So I'm watching a lot of kid shows and, those kids songs are getting stuck in my head, to be honest with you. But when I do get a chance, then I listen to pretty much everything, but anywhere from rap to pretty much just country is the only thing I don't listen to.
So I have gotten on more. I've always been into a little bit of everything. I've been to everything
Right.
from Kenny Chesney to friggin' I've been
Yeah, I
to
know
see
you're a big
Jeezy I don't
country
know how many
fan.
times, and
Yeah.
Five Finger Death Punch and everything else.
Yeah.
So speaking of Five Finger Death Punch,
Yeah.
like I said, we were going to have Zoltan on. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us some of the people you've gotten to train with along the way, and some of any funny stories you got with that, whether it's Zoltan,
Oh,
whether
man.
it's fight game related.
So one of the first, let's see, as far as like celebrities, I don't know if you know familiar with the old show Married with Children.
Mm-hmm.
The dad on Married with Children, Ed O'Neill, who's now on Modern Family. He trains jiu-jitsu, still does. And when I was training, going out to the Gracie Academy, he was a purple belt. And he used to mostly do private lessons with some of the higher belts, and Hoist and Hori and Gracie. He would do private lessons. And here I am one day, I'm doing a class out in California, and here's Ed O'Neill from Married with Children at the time. This other show wasn't started yet. And he's in the locker room, and Hoist comes in, and he's like, okay, guys, he's like, Ed is obviously a movie star and he can't afford to get hurt. So Hoist trusted me enough to be partners with Ed O'Neill. And I was going to partner up with him in the class because he needed to have somebody he could trust to not kind of spaz out and hurt him. And I think I was a purple belt myself. We might have been the same rank. And before we start class, he pulls me aside. He's like, look, he's like, I make money with my face. Don't hurt me. And it was just kind of a funny, random thing. So I got to train with him. And then, the last couple of years have been kind of crazy as far as having experiences with some musical people. This was a couple years ago now. I got to train with Maynard from Tool. They had a show. It wasn't that he has a couple of smaller bands that he goes around with, and this was a perfect circle. They were at the Fox downtown, and we get a phone call. Brandon McDaniel, the other instructor at Warrior Way, he gets a phone call, and through jiu-jitsu, like you said, you just meet tons of people, right? And you have this crazy network of all kinds of people. And we had met this guy who did security, and it turns out he did security for like traveling rock and roll bands and musical bands. So we get this phone call saying that Maynard's in town, and Maynard likes to train jiu-jitsu like a bunch of other people do that train and perform. He likes to train before his concerts, and are we interested in going and doing a private lesson with him? We're like, hell yeah, right? So it was pretty crazy. We go downtown, they give us backstage passes, pretty much all access passes. We go downstairs, they show us where to change. They have this private room with mats laid out. And sure enough, here comes Maynard with his purple belt and his head of security. And we got to train for, a couple hours and just kind of shoot the shit, and gave us tickets to the show, like second row, third row seats. And it was phenomenal. It was an awesome experience. And then that was kind of like this connection for this podcast we were trying to make happen. Zoltan from Five Finger Death Punch, he's huge into jiu-jitsu and judo. I think he just got his purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and I think he's a brown or black belt in judo. He's really good in judo. And when like Instagram started years ago, he was actually like one of my first followers, and I didn't really know who he was. And I kind of clicked on his profile, and I see the guy's got hundreds of thousands of followers. I'm like, who is this guy? And I'm looking through his pictures. I'm like, this guy's like some kind of rock star or something. So I kind of start doing my research, and I realize who this guy is, and it was just through that we kind of connected. And, there was one time there was a Bellator fight that he was at with the Gracies, and I sent him a message that just said, hey, sounds like a fun night. I'm going to bed. I'm going to miss the fights. I wake up the next morning and there's like, he's texted me like pages of fight results letting me know what happened. So he's a huge fan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. And kind of long story short, they came to a concert a couple months ago, and they were in Toledo, actually, not Michigan. And he's a big supporter of the law enforcement and military. So I have some friends who are cops, Mike Edwards, who's kind of a YouTube, guy, Mike the Cop, if you guys have seen him, and Dave, and they're police officers. So through them and through him, he invited us to their show in Toledo. And yeah, got to train with him again. Well, Zoltan actually had a foot injury, so he couldn't train with us, but he was backstage with us talking. And his head of security is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, Iaco. Great guy. So yeah, we're just backstage training. They have mats set up, and these other bands are walking back and forth, and they're just about to go on stage. But here we are for it was probably like 2 or 3 hours. And, Zoltan's watching us train, and, we're kind of taking rounds with the head of security guy. And it's just super cool, just a fun, chilled, training session. And in between rounds, if I wasn't rolling, I'd go and shoot the shit with Zoltan. And we get done. The best part was we get done rolling, and he's literally they've got to get ready to go on, but he's out on the mat showing us these judo grips and, some really good stuff. Actually taught me a lot. He's got this plastic boot on for his injury. And yeah, so then that happened, and we went to, same thing. They gave us awesome, stage side. We were right on the stage while they were performing that night. It was super cool. And it's all because of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Hey man, Jiu-Jitsu has gotten to do some pretty cool things for me as well that you actually were part of. So, another little peek behind the curtain for all of you guys who listen to us every week. I've been working with kids with disabilities now for a long time now. I haven't got to do as much lately because adult problems, but I've gotten to take some of the kids that I've gotten to work with and have them come train with us at MASH, and Ange helped me out, with a few kids in particular. And, it's just crazy, man, because it's when I got into it purely just so that I could, learn how to defend myself. At that point I already had been fighting, but when I originally got into, any type of, self-defense type thing, it was just so that I could learn how to defend myself, being a kid that had, health issues and things like that. You also are a high school teacher. So what do you think the benefits of jiu-jitsu are for kids today in 2020? Because my personal opinion, I feel like if more kids knew self-defense, not in a meaning of, okay, I know how to fight, so I'm going to go kick your ass. But if more kids knew how to defend themselves, I swear I feel like a lot of the bullying you see, a lot of the stuff that happens in schools, I swear it wouldn't happen because they'd know that you might catch an ass whooping if you don't, if you don't chill out. So for you as a teacher, how do you think jiu-jitsu is applicable and can be effective, not only for kids, but adults as well?
As far as for kids concerned, before I was a full-time teacher, I did a lot of subbing. So I subbed in the district that was close to Warrior Way, the gym that I mostly train at. And it's crazy, Kyle, because I would go around and I would sub in different buildings. And every once in a while, I would happen to have a kid who was maybe trained at Warrior Way for a little bit or was currently training at Warrior Way. And you could just see these kids were different than the rest of the kids. They were leaders, they were polite, they were, respectful, they didn't get into trouble, they didn't pick on people, they were just good kids, And, we talked about how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu may not be like traditional martial arts in a lot of sense, but in that regard, I think it's very effective for teaching discipline, teaching respect. And, that's something that, you like to hear, you hear people complain about this generation a lot, right? But at the end of the day, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu especially, it's very humbling. It's very empowering at the same time, right? So as much as it gives you great confidence, like you said, at any time on any given day you could catch an ass whooping in the gym, right? And there's nothing more humbling than that. So I think in that regards, for adults and kids in general, I mean, it's the ultimate stress relief. It's the, like I said, when I first started training, I just immediately dropped like a ton of weight, and I wasn't working out at the gym. And you think about how much you miss jujitsu and training now because you can't, right? And it just gives you all this, like, the stress relief and all the benefits that come with that.
So I've had to be away from jiu-jitsu for quite a little while now because of work and all that kind of stuff, man. So it's been killing me because I liked jiu-jitsu just for the fact that, first of all, it's a full body workout. For anybody that's never tried it and they're like, oh, well, how's that going to help me with my fitness? Let me tell you, you will learn quick and in a hurry that if your sole plan is you're going to just go in there and muscle somebody around, it ain't going to work.
I don't know if you remember if you remember like your first classes, but I do. And I remember having muscles hurt that I didn't even know were muscles,
for sure, dude.
I mean, there was like, the insides of your legs from trying to keep somebody in the guard. Like, what the hell was that? Like, I just remember having these injuries, or not injuries, but having sore muscles that I didn't even know could be sore.
So for me, man, I'll never forget. So I was really sore because at the time I was doing jiu-jitsu, boxing, and then I do Muay Thai right after. Now, like I said, I have cerebral palsy here. When I first came in, my legs were not exactly very flexible. I mean, dude, let me tell you, to throw a high kick was a son of a bitch. Now I can do that, but still, dude, throwing a high kick was a son of a bitch. And then after already having a triangle and all that, so I'll never forget the first tournament. I will never forget. And Todd, I know you're watching, so you'll know this story. Todd goes, yeah, I was a white belt at the time. And he goes, yeah, you should do a tournament. Yeah, sure. Whatever. I'm thinking, I mean, I'd already fought before. I figured it can't be no worse than a boxing fight. So I go and do it. The kid that I fought had the nastiest gi ever. I caught a staph infection from the kid. Like, I shit you not. It was so bad that I could smell it. Like, the lines they got on the mat where I could smell them. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to forfeit. And we get to a point in the match, and he had caught me in a triangle. Now, for those of you who don't know, jiu-jitsu weight classes are a little different than an MMA weight class. Like, you have to weigh in right at 185, if you're a middleweight for an MMA fight. But when it comes to jiu-jitsu, for me, mine was 141 to 155. So the kid that I went with, I still don't think he was 155, but he had me in a triangle, and I could not get out. And I just, like, I don't know what happened, but I stood up, and I stood up completely from flat on my stomach with him and just power bombed, dude. And his head bounced off the mat, and the ref like stopped and was like, oh shit. He's like, do that again, you're disqualified. I was like, hey, dude.
Oh, he let you away with it the first time?
That was the first time I did it. Like, I was about to go out, and I'm like, well, I'm not going out like that. And that poor kid's head bounced off the mat. But that brings me to my next point. So we talked about how you got into jiu-jitsu and all that kind of stuff. But you also had a long career in MMA, fighting for King of the Cage and XCC and a lot of the other promotions around here in Michigan, and a lot of the old days back when it was friggin' the wild, wild west of Michigan MMA, man. So tell me, that had to cause some interesting situations for you being a teacher and all that. Tell me a little bit about that. Were there any stories that stick out, or did any of your students ever show up to any of your fights?
Yeah, well, kind of, yeah. So, I mean, originally when I started fighting, it was never really an issue because you talk about like the Wild West days. There were no fights in Michigan. I had to drive all the way down to Indiana. Like, when I say Indiana, I mean the southernmost point of Indiana. If you look at a map, we were at the very southern point. Literally, if you crossed a bridge, you were in Kentucky. That's how far south, and I'm not even joking, that's how far south in Indiana we were. That's where I had to go to find the nearest MMA fights. And back then, like, nobody knew what it was, and you would explain it to people, and they were like, is that like professional wrestling? And I would just say, yeah, it's just, it was too difficult to explain it. So, nobody really ever kind of knew what was going on. But when I started fighting for King of the Cage, I wasn't full-time teaching yet. I was subbing. No, I'm sorry. I was student teaching, which is kind of the last thing right before you start teaching, like officially, right? So I fight for this King of the Cage show, and I can't remember where it was now, Ohio maybe. And the show was going to be on pay-per-view. And my fight was supposed to be on the undercard. So it wasn't going to be on the pay-per-view card, right?
Right.
So they didn't advertise me. I wasn't on the poster. I knew I wasn't going to be on pay-per-view, and whatever, like no big deal. Well, turns out at the show, they had one of the main card fights had been scratched. Something happened. The fight got canceled. So everybody kind of moved up one place on the card, right? So I was the last fight before the main card, which was going to be pay-per-view. All of a sudden, my fight gets bumped up. I'm on the pay-per-view show. No big deal still. I don't think anything of it. It's still very small back then, and King of the Cage was kind of it was a different setup for King of the Cage back then, and it just wasn't very big. It was the first time it was on pay-per-view, blah, blah, blah. So the fight happens. I think I lost that fight, but whatever. So I come back to school, and the pay-per-view was going to be like a couple weeks later. It wasn't live. So I'm walking down the hall a couple weeks later, and this kid comes up to me. I don't know the kid. He's not one of my students. And he taps me on the shoulder, and he whispers, so I kind of lean in, just this little kid. It was a middle school at the time. I wasn't at the high school. And he's like, and at this time, Kyle, I didn't tell anybody about MMA. I didn't want it to affect my chances of getting a teaching job. Like, I didn't know what people would think of it. So I kept it to myself, So he taps me on the shoulder, and I lean in. He's like, I saw you on TV. And I'm like, and I know instantly what he's talking about. I'm like, no, you didn't. He's like, yeah. He's like, you fight MMA. And I instantly kind of panicked. Cause like I said, for just whatever reason, I just didn't want anybody to know or get the wrong idea about me, And I'm like, no, I don't. He's like, yeah, you do. He's like, my brother's an MMA fan, and he had friends over, and they were watching the show. He's like, I saw you. And it was that moment, and it was gone. Everybody knew about me fighting. Everybody started Google searching me and stuff. So it became like the school, whatever, school legend or whatever. So
did the school ever give you grief with it?
No, absolutely not. It was just, at that time, like I said, I was trying to get a job, permanent job, and I was still a student teacher. So I just didn't want anybody to get the wrong idea. I tried to, I obviously I treat myself or present myself very professionally at school and as a jiu-jitsu instructor, and I just didn't want anybody to get the wrong idea, because back then, like I said, it wasn't mainstream, right? So I just didn't want to have any conversations where I had to explain it, and how do I justify being a teacher when I beat people up or get beat up myself. So I just didn't want any weird stuff. But I mean, it ended up just being more funny than anything else, and the teachers would give me, bust my balls about it, and the principal, it was fine. And it actually became kind of a cool thing to kind of connect with the students and a lot of parents as well. I can't tell you how many times I'd sit down at parent-teacher conferences, and the dad just wants to talk about MMA the whole time and not about their kid in my class. So it just kind of ended up being a funny thing to be a part of my life as a teacher.
See, I can only imagine, because it's funny. For me, like I said, I went from being the kid who was always getting picked on to being the kid who I didn't go picking, take that back. At first, I went and started picking fights just because I wanted it known to leave me the fuck alone.
Right. Hey.
After that, I didn't want no problems, because like you said, jiu-jitsu teaches you really quick and in a hurry that, look, dude, you can go in there and get your ass whooped. Like for me, I had a guy come in the gym, and Ethan Jordan, if you check this out, you'll know because I'll never forget this. So we had a guy come into MASH one day. It was one of the noon classes, and dude comes in and he goes, he said that he was ex-Navy or some branch of the military, and that he knew capoeira and he knew all this other shit.
Oh yeah.
And the guy outweighed me by a bunch, but he had got on top. He was in side control, and he's like, you can tell he's trying to like big body me. And at this point, I had 3 stripes on my blue belt, maybe 4 stripes on my blue belt. And dude is just like really trying to be a dick. And I'm like, dude, like, I'm not going full bore here.
Right.
And I was like, all right, fine. That's how we're going to play. So he leaned forward once, leaned forward twice. On the third one, I rolled him. And as I rolled him, I went right into an arm triangle, and he tapped before I ever squeezed.
Yeah.
And
that's all it takes, right?
And Ethan comes in. He goes, "That's what the fuck I'm talking about." He was because he watched the whole thing, and like you could tell the guy was clearly trying to be like a jerk about it.
Right.
And it's like that's the funny thing, because like once I kind of knew, and then people knew, like after I'd gotten a few fights, more so once people knew. Then it became, at least when I was in high school, I don't know how much they do it now, but I mean, hell, you still see it all over YouTube, where people would meet up and just box. And like, like,
they still,
oh, well, Kyle, you train. Why don't you fight? So like, dude, like, no, like, no.
The longer you train, the less you want to do that. You know, I'll admit, when I first started training, or, you know, as a blue belt, like you kind of wonder, like, I want to see if this stuff works. Right. And you just get to a point where you know what you can do. And I remember, God, I was probably a purple belt. I don't even remember, but it was when I lived in Royal Oak, and we were out at the bars and walking on the street, and somebody bumped into me and, you know, told me to get out of his way. And I just kind of leaned back or looked back. I'm like, dude, what's your problem? You know? And he started mouthing off, and that would have been my chance right there to like test it out. Right. But it's like, you realize that it's a joke, and I kind of just laughed it off, and I'm like, all right, buddy, you're a tough guy, and just turned around and walked away. And all my friends were like, dude, why didn't you like jiu-jitsu him? You know, that's what they would always say. And you can't even explain. Yeah, you're right. Why don't you jiu-jitsu him? And I'm just like, it's not even worth it, you know? And yeah, it's just, the more you know, the more you realize you don't need to prove it, show it, or do it. It's amazing how jiu-jitsu changes your attitude towards that stuff.
So my question to you is, obviously, you know, you've been around the game for quite a long time. I mean, hell, at this point, I've been around the game for a very long time.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, when you started, you know, like I said, it was the Wild West of MMA, and even in jiu-jitsu, you didn't have, you know, a lot of people talking about jiu-jitsu back then.
Right.
Where now I feel like, and especially here in Michigan, I feel like Michigan was kind of overlooked. I mean, same thing in boxing.
Yeah.
People knew that they came from, you know, people knew that, you know, we had Kronk and things like that for boxing. Right. But other than that, I mean, Detroit wasn't exactly looked at like a hot spot. And now, I mean, as far as jiu-jitsu, I mean, you've had guys that we've trained with either when they started or in the past, whether it be guys like Garmo, who's went and trained everywhere and competed in all the tournaments. You got Miles, who's went out and fought in the UFC and Bellator and all that stuff. You know, Hootie's trained all over the place and competed all over the place. I mean, granted, a lot of these guys aren't with us anymore, but I mean, just the growth of Michigan jiu-jitsu, even at the time I've been in it, is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, you got to realize, and I know this is even before your time, but shit, even before my time, like there were MMA shows in Michigan back in the day. Like before I started, the place I started at, they fought, it was in Battle Creek, I think. There was an MMA show back then. And in the early days of the UFC, one of the biggest UFCs for attendance was in Detroit. And, you know, Michigan has kind of been there. And, you know, like you said, for jiu-jitsu, you know, for this region, I think Michigan is pretty like packed with jiu-jitsu talent, competitors, and, you know, black belts. And yeah, it's kind of a, you know, a hidden spot, I think, in the jiu-jitsu community.
So, I mean, and that's the thing, like, now I feel like there's more awareness to things, but like that brings me to, I got a story that'll go with it, but I'll ask you, since we're winding up, we got about 15 minutes left or so.
Yep.
So, and Devin, since I know you couldn't be with us tonight, I'll give you a free shot, and I'll let Angelo, I'll let Angelo decide this one, since I know I already know where you were going to go with it. So before I get to that,
okay.
Since you've been in the game so long, what's the most shifty story you've got as far as like a fight situation? Because I've got a pretty funny one from my last boxing fight.
My God, I mean,
because I've been to some fights
something.
where it's been some pretty.
Look, man. I mean, if you've been, you've hung around us in MMA shows, and you've been backstage, and you've helped guys prepare and train, and you've gone into weigh-ins and seen the shitty things that happen at just in weigh-ins alone. Forget anything else that goes on, but just on the weigh-ins, like, my God, come on, dude. But I remember one time
drama.
Yeah, oh my God. I mean, there's always something, but like, I remember one fight. This was that older promotion I was fighting for. The fight was for 184, right? I show up, I weigh 184. My opponent weighs 200 and something pounds. Didn't even try to cut weight. So what am I supposed to do at that point, right? Like, we're talking at this time, Kyle, I'm fighting for like $200. Like, that's what the prize purse was. I was losing money to go and fight in this show, taking off of work, renting a car. Like, I was losing money, even if I won, right? So I'm trying to get like $50 extra. Like, I'm like, I'm not going to fight. The guy was a monster as it was, right? So the promoter's like, well, if you want to, be a pussy and ruin the show,
wow.
That's how they would make it feel like it was your obligation to fight this guy, And I fought. I ended up beating the guy, but it was ridiculous, and it's like just shit like that. And, promoters in general, like, you can never trust them, I mean, my last fight there. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll never forget the fight that we were both at in Pontiac at the Crowfoot Ballroom.
Oh, yeah.
When Garmo, who we talked about, and they damn near had a riot because that dude wanted to try to fight Darren Cruikshank.
Oh, my God.
And then
there's
for me,
something.
I had a guy. So this was just a smoker fight that we did at the gym. And Corey and Jesse, I know you're in here watching. Corey was at this fight. So feel free to comment any of your thoughts on said fight. Obviously, yes, I just aged Corey and we've known each other for quite a little bit. So we went and I fought, and at the time I was fighting at 120 and 125. I couldn't make that weight at this point if I tried.
Right.
So I made weight, whatever, and you're just sitting around, whatever. And then they come up to me and they go, well, the guy that you were supposed to fight didn't show up. Well, we're going to have you fight this guy because you hit hard. So you'll be, if you hit him, you'll be all right.
Yeah.
So I had friends there, right? So me being a young, dumb kid, this was literally after this fight was when I came to come train with you guys. And so I was 16 at the time. And I was like, well, fuck it. I'll fight him, whatever. I get in there, and at first, because he was so much bigger than me, he wasn't using his range at all. Mind you, this kid that I fought was 6 foot, and he weighed 145 pounds. Jeez. So he outweighed me by 20 pounds and was a foot taller because I was a lot shorter at the time. Because like I said, I'm only 15, 16 at the time. So we go in and we start fighting, and the kid figures, well, I don't got to use my reach. Well, he was dumb enough to get close, and I cracked him hard in the first round. After that, he never let me get close. He was just using his jab, and then anytime I'd get close and hit him a couple times, he'd like wrap me up. So I finally got pissed off, man. I picked him up and I slammed him, and he goes, well, this ain't UFC. Well, maybe you should have brought the guy I was supposed to fight, and we wouldn't have had this. That was the kind of shit that used to happen. That people see all the stuff they see on TV, and they don't know what all these guys have gone into before you get to that point. Because I remember Tony Hervey was the first person I sparred with at MASH. the night I
Right.
got there. And this is back when Tony still had the big fro and all
Oh,
that
yeah,
shit,
yeah,
right
yeah,
around the
yeah,
time he
yeah,
fought Gomi.
yeah.
So, like, you know, it's just funny because it's shit that, like, nobody knows. And then, like, you know, now, like you said, I'm at a point where, like, if it's not a jiu-jitsu tournament or, like, something to that ilk, I really
Mhm.
could care less to fight
Yeah,
anybody at this point.
yeah.
You know,
You know, I don't know. I had a fight a couple years ago. I tried to do one last fight. You know,
I
I'm
remember I was
46.
there.
I'm 46 now, dude, right? You know, so I'm like, I just wanted to give it one last shot. Just, you know, you always want to fight. And yeah, you know, they're trying to find somebody for me. Cause look, obviously I'm not trying to fight some 23-year-old, you know, monster. So try to find somebody my age, you know, blah, blah, blah. They had one guy. And funny thing is, I was actually, I should have told this story, but whatever. I was supposed to fight this guy years ago, and he ended up no showing like pretty much the day of the fight. And so they find him years later. We're supposed to fight again. And I told the promoter, I said, you better make sure because this guy's known for not showing up. And it was just all kinds of shady shit. You know, they were supposed to find somebody my age. They ended up finding this younger guy, and whatever, it is what it is. But you know, they had promised me to a bunch of people across the state. I saw one guy at a tournament who starts talking shit to me, saying I'm ducking him, and I'm like, I don't even know who you are. He's like, yeah, you're too scared to fight me at King of the Cage, and I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, they told me I was gonna fight you, and you never took the fight. I'm like, bro, I don't even know who the hell you are. So I knew the promoter for this particular King of the Cage show. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you know, and that's what they do. They just play, and it's
They
like
play
you
one
said,
against the other, man.
yeah,
And then the worst of it is, it's like I can never be more grateful that I did find boxing and things like that. But I'll never forget, dude. People don't know how big of a letdown it is. I remember I traveled out to 59 West one time to fight. Got all the way there. Won't go into the story of what happened because it was some bullshit. But yeah, went and did that, did all your medicals, did all that. Yeah, you're not fighting. It's like, oh,
yeah, oh, yeah,
like,
I've seen that. Yeah.
Like, fuck, man. Like,
And it's like, I didn't even care enough about it to do it back then, let alone now. And it's like you said, I'll do a jiu-jitsu tournament any day of the week, but MMA, like, I don't know, that's a short-lived career, as it should be, I think. But,
well, Ange, we're getting down to the end of our time
all
here.
right,
You know,
man.
let everybody know where they can find you on social media and all that good stuff. And hey, if you're looking to do some jiu-jitsu, check out Warrior Way Martial Arts. Check out Mash Gym. Hey, I've been training there for years. They probably got some dumbass stories they can tell you to embarrass me. And here you go, Devin. Here's your last shot. Are there any stories you've got of all the years of training with me that you can remember? Because Devin was raring trying to get you to embarrass the shit out of me on here, but you lost your chance, asshole.
Man, no, you were always a respectful kid and just eager to learn. I mean, I remember this, and this is what I mean. I take it as you should take it as a compliment, but you used to get so frustrated when you couldn't do something, you know. And I remember just having to tell you, like, this is the thing about jiu-jitsu. You can always make it work for you, you know. And you used to just get so frustrated when you couldn't do something, but you would always you would catch your breath kind of and come back and do it, and you stuck with it, obviously, you know, and you never quit. So I don't really have anything embarrassing to say about you, man. Yeah.
Yes.
Just
Devin.
Yeah. No, man. No, I always respected the way you would always come in and you busted through. People with, you know, twice the ability, you know, that you have quit a lot sooner. And it says a lot about you, how much you've done with jiu-jitsu and how you give back to people. I just think that's awesome. And, you know, that's what jiu-jitsu is all about. And it's guys like you that we want to have at the gym every day of the week.
Hey, I appreciate that, man, because I mean, like I said, it definitely presented a hard time with some things, but you know, it's funny though, because I feel like later on, you know, I feel like that opened up more doors where I know there were multiple times where you were teaching where I'd catch somebody when we were rolling. And I don't know if maybe I got tired and they thought, okay, we're going to run right through, but it's like, all right, dude, That's
Yeah.
how we're gonna run this. That's how things are
Yep.
gonna go, man. So
that's all you can do.
hey, man, it's been a good time. And like I said, let them know where they can find you on social media, all that good stuff. And like I said, man, if you guys are looking to train at all, Mass Gym, Warrior Way, that's the way to go. And if you haven't done so already, hit that link, right corner, hit the subscribe button. We've got plenty of good stuff coming to you. There's interviews with DDP, Excalibur, all that stuff. And make sure you check out Angelo on Instagram as well.
Thanks, Kyle. Warrior Way Martial Arts on Facebook and Instagram, and that's where we're at.
Hey, man, and with that being said, make sure you're following the show at KO3C Pod. Go to KO3CPod.com. You can find all of our past episodes. We got Booker T, Bruce Pritchard, Eric Bischoff, Sam Alvey, Miles Jury. We've got, look, you already know the deal. If you're watching, you already know what's up. And those of you who don't, get with the program. Till next week, peace.